Hello, Bruvs. We're back with The Sorcerer's Apprentice by Heinz Ewers, a book that I now have, but I choose not to read out of it because it's in a bit of a brittle condition, so I'm just going to read the digital version. And I will turn off the light to do so. Chapter 3. Innocentia quid est innocentia, ubi libido dominator. Innocentia, I believe it says love. Presidium est Cicero. Il est passe. Or I'll just show it to you. I don't know what it means anyway, so what's the point of reading it? All right, let's see if I can get this to move. No, it's not moving. Why? Why must you vex me? Why must you vex me? Just move. Doesn't want to. I don't want to move that either. Chapter 3. Frank Braun awoke very late. He looked about him, a little surprised, not sure at once where he was. Then he jumped up and went to the window. Very well, then, so it's Val Discodra, he said. He reflected, but hardly knew exactly what he was seeking. His head did not ache. He felt light and fresh. Only a weariness lay in him, a pleasant, gently murmuring fatigue that slumbered in all his limbs. He laughed. Oh, yes, he had been drinking, as in the old days, and he had lifted his voice in song. 100 songs and 100 glasses. He had sung and he had drunk. But with whom? There was Peppino Raimondi, the landlord, and Herr Alois Drenker, the fat frontier guard. True, and he had drunk the latter under the table. And then, what had happened then? He sat up on the edge of the bed, recalling it all. Yes, that was it. He had found his goal. A faith had come to him, almost caressingly. His glance passed over the table, which was stacked high with books and papers. Ah, now it would no longer be like work. It would be mere child's play now. Hello, bruvs. And he laughed. The wine gave me all that as a gift. Of what use is thought? The wise men have visions, then they understand. His eyes rested on his garments, confused and scattered. They lay on the floor. That was hardly his way. Had he been so completely drunk? Yet, even so, he picked up his coat. Doing so, he saw his hands. Long scratches ran diagonally across them. He went to the mirror. His face showed little wounds and tears all over. The coagulated blood clung to the edges. What was that? He closed his eyes, passed his hand across his forehead, but he was not seeking in his memory. No, he almost fought against these thoughts. Hello, bruvs. Then he shook his head. His lips were tight pressed. They drooped with an expression of harsh resignation, as from a feeling of intensely conscious suffering. It is useless, he said. I cannot even forget. He went about the room, gathered his garments, and laid them across the bed. He strode up and down with long, firm steps. Very well, then, he continued. One must bring order out of all this chaos. He noticed that he was speaking aloud and laughed at himself. Yes, yes, like all people who are alone a great deal. He stood for a moment, then walked again. He drank a glass of water and lit a cigarette. He exhaled the smoke vigorously. Then he cried aloud and sharply, as though lashing himself, Let us make an end. Thus it was then. And he broke stone after stone from the quarries of his recollection. Thus it had begun. He saw that glimmer of light from the third window. A faint, thin gleam and a spark crept toward him, as on a long fuse. He saw it coming, felt it speeding nearer and nearer, swifter and ever swifter. But he was not afraid. It seemed as though this mine in his breast were awakening the kiss of that fire with greedy rapture. Body and soul both were full to the brim. Let the lightning strike. He ran to the house and leaped up the stone steps. He glanced into the guest room and saw the guard lying on his face on the floor, grasping his helmet tightly with both hands. So you won't give it up, he laughed, but he flew up the stairs as though fate were driving him. Yes, it was true. What he had thought upon entering his room. It is fate. He stripped off his clothes. In a moment he was in his pajamas. Before her door, he hesitated, almost afraid. He listened, but heard nothing. Then swiftly he turned the knob and entered. He saw the picture of the Mother of God with the box tree twigs in the frame. He observed that 3 blue anemones had been added. He saw the little holy water basin at the right, and at the left, close by the window, the perpetual lamp. The faint light fell on the girl's bed. She was wide awake. Her great open eyes stared at him. Her face seemed pale, and her lips trembled. She spoke no word. Her blue eyes turned beseechingly to the Mother of God. Her fingers were tightly intertwined. Yes, she was praying. He followed her look. He passed swiftly between her and the Virgin. The Madonna sent me, he said passionately. He stretched out his hand, grasped her nightgown, and tore it in long shreds from her shoulders. Her white flesh lay before his eyes like the foam of the sea. Panting, he repeated, "The Madonna sent me." She did not close her eyes and did not weep. Motionless, she lay in her pain, looking at him as though he were a monster from which there was no escape. And her glance rested on the hand that imprisoned her arm, this horrible, pitiless, fearful hand. The sudden strength that had animated his body flowed into his soul. Then in him passion was transmitted into a full, pure harmony. He spoke, and his voice was soft and restrained, like distant music. Strangely alluring, his words sounded in her ears. He knew well that she was compelled to listen to him. All the tender words that he had ever said to beautiful women became alive now, flowed from his lips, all and many more, fairer and stranger. He found tones that intoxicated himself, ingratiating sounds that sang like harps. Like the sweet rain of summer, his words fell and cooled and covered her naked, tormented body. Then she wept, but he took her in his arms carefully, tenderly, as if she were a child. His fingers glided over her cheeks like the fragrance of acacia blooms, and his breath played about her temples, trembled in her hair like the fumes of a holy censer. "The Madonna wills it," he whispered. She turned and looked at him, and it seemed to her that this was an utterly different man from him who had just this one she did not know, not he. A great astonishment lay in her silent glance. But a moment ago, no, she knew no longer what had happened a moment ago. She was lying in the arms of this man, of no other. And gently, involuntarily, her fingers pressed his arm. She was frightened and withdrew her hand swiftly. But he was not silent. His tongue spoke in his eyes and his hands. He wove the net mesh by mesh and ensnared her soul with exquisite words of love. She closed her eyes and permitted him to kiss her lids. More tightly his arms entwined her body. She felt his pulses hammer against her flesh. A great warmth went out from him, engulfed her. Like a caressing bath his love surrounded her. And she did not resist when he sought her lips. Now everything seemed a dream, and she yielded utterly. But he felt that she was reborn in his arms. The girl in her was dead, and gently arose from the hard chrysalis, the butterfly. And he tasted to the full the rapture of this victory. With what savage violence the woman in her awakened. Later he awoke. He found her slumbering, breathing softly. Her hand rested upon his bosom. Her arms were entwined about his shoulders. Carefully he loosened her hands, got up softly, without a kiss. He hurried out. He wondered to find the door still open, and he went over to his room and threw himself upon his bed. He slept at once, dreamlessly, without moving a limb. Thus it had been. Frank Braun arose, went to the window, and gazed upon the sun-drenched lake. A feeling of profound satisfaction enfolded him and blended strangely with his pleasant fatigue. He stretched himself, opened his arms wide, laughed happily. These had been victories, 3 mighty victories. I can still drink as of old and find revelations, and I can still love as of old. And he was delighted as a boy that he was still master of 3 great arts. He took off his pajamas and went to the mirror naked. With a sponge he carefully washed the scratches on his face and shoulders, his arms and hands. The song of Edith of the Swan's Neck occurred to him, and he said, and I'm just going to let you look at it because I don't know German, so it's just kind of pointless to read it. And he laughed happily because the wounds of love hurt him far, far more than the others. Then he took a bath and dressed, and only on the terrace did the question come to him, how would the girl meet him, and with what feelings had the new day found her? He went into the guest room. The landlord came and brought his breakfast. The man seemed ill-humored and handed him at once the bill for last night's wine. You take no chances. Frank Braun raised his voice to be heard. Oh, well, the old man said, better be on the safe side. He gathered up the money, counted it carefully, and went out. The girl did not come. He breakfasted, and then went into the garden. Perhaps she's on the lake, he thought, but no boat was to be seen anywhere. He took a walk and came back to dinner. Again the old man waited on him, morose as ever. Could she possibly have told him something? He reflected, but he could not force himself to ask. He did ask after the guard, however. He rode away hours ago, growled the landlord. He rode away in terrible misery. He was feeling more wretched than I even. How about my helmet? Frank Braun asked. Oh, yes, Ramonde nodded. I was to give you his message. He took it along because, of course, he couldn't ride without a helmet. But he's going to buy a new one, he says, and he'll bring back the old one when he comes here again. The German nodded. Yes, and where is... But he did not finish the sentence. She must be somewhere about. He would succeed in finding her. In the afternoon he went to his room, straightened out his books, arranged everything for his work. He gnawed at his penholder, but he was in no mood to begin. Then he got up and went into her room. She was not there. So he went out, wandered through the narrow valley, up and down, hastily, nervously, impatiently. At supper, the landlord again brought in the dishes. He could wait no longer, so he asked quickly, Well, and isn't your daughter here? The old man sat down beside him. His wretchedness seemed to have vanished, and with it his ill humor. Teresa? He said quietly. She has gone into town. Frank Braun nodded. He was glad to be rid of the unpleasant thought that perhaps she had betrayed something to her father. This had tormented him, although he had not believed it for a moment. To the city, he repeated. Yes, said the old man. She wanted to see her father confessor. Her father confessor? So she wanted to confess. He laughed. What a face Don Vincenzo would make when he heard of the curious effect of his warning letter. Yet the situation did not give him a feeling that was happy. Raimondi filled his pipe. I sent a letter by her, too. I wanted to thank him for having sent you here. Again, Frank Braun laughed. He had a keen sense of the ironic comedy of the situation. What in the world would the old priest answer? When did she leave? He asked. When? She left by the stage at 11 o'clock. But the stage didn't leave today. Oh, yes, today. Yesterday it went to Atola and returns today to the city. For that reason, Teresa went today. Otherwise, she would have to wait a whole week. And so she will stay in the city the whole week? Frank Braun asked. The landlord shook his head. Certainly not, he said. She'll probably stay with her aunt overnight and return tomorrow on foot. What will you drink today, sir? Nothing, Frank Braun answered. He got up and went to the door. The landlord looked after him and laid his pipe heavily on the table. Nothing, nothing at all? The German turned around. No, nothing at all, my friend. I am not given to drinking often. Once in every few years I have the impulse. Years, years. The landlord got up, grasped his chin with his bony hand, and stroked it. Sir, he stammered, sir. Frank Braun saw that he had something more to say that he found it difficult to express. He went up to him. Well, then, what is it? Why, sir, the landlord stammered, I believe that you would drink a couple of bottles daily. I'm not thinking of such a thing, the German interrupted him, and I suppose that is very unpleasant for you. The landlord said, yes, since you have lived here so cheaply. Cheaply? Frank Braun laughed aloud. You call your prices cheap? Well, look here, Ramonde, but it seems to me that what I pay you for board and lodging is rather considerable. Yes, sir, said the landlord. Oh, yes, but then it isn't only the food and lodging, isn't it? Well, what else is there? Ramonde hesitated. He spat thoughtfully, filled his pipe again, opened his lips and closed them. Sir, he said, sir. Well, what the devil is it? Well, if I must say it, weren't you with Teresa last night? He watched him greedily from under his lids as though lying in wait. The German was silent for a moment, hardly knowing just what to say. Did the girl tell you anything? He asked. Ramonde shook his head with energy. No, oh no, sir, she didn't say a thing. Not a thing. I heard you. Is that so? So you heard me. I thought you were deaf as a post, Ramonde. I have to roar like a drill sergeant to make you understand me. In addition, you were drunk last night. You heard nothing, absolutely nothing. It's all in your imagination. But the landlord's little eyes twinkled, and he laughed a hoarse, dry laugh. No, oh no, sir, it wasn't my imagination. You were with the girl. Teresa cried out. How she did cry. That woke me up, and I went upstairs. The door was open, the light was burning in the lamp. I saw you. Frank Braun grasped him by the arm. And then, Raimondi, then you went calmly down again? The landlord nodded eagerly. Yes, sir, certainly. And you must pardon me, I wouldn't have said a word if... The German laughed bitterly. If I were a more profitable guest, eh? Yes, if I were to drink a couple of bottles of wine daily, is it? Is that it? Sir, said the landlord, sir. But Frank Braun interrupted him sharply. Be silent, Raimonde, he cried. Nothing else you have to say interests me. Naturally, you must not lose a proper profit. Since I don't drink, I must make it up to you in other ways. He put his hand in his pocket and drew out several bills. Here, he said, count them. He threw the bills on the table and went out. He read for hours before going to bed. Once again he went to the window and looked out. Was she not coming? But the valley slept. So she is mine thrice over, he murmured. First I took her by force, then she gave herself to me, and finally her father sold her to me. When he came down next morning, Teresa brought him his breakfast. He greeted her joyfully and grasped her arm, but she eluded him swiftly, said good day softly, and hurried out. He jumped up, followed her, but at the door ran straight into her father. So Teresa is back again? He asked. Yes, for just an hour, said the old man. She didn't see the priest. Frank Braun asked, she didn't see him? No, he is on an inspection trip, so she left my letter and returned again at once. So she walked the whole night long? The landlord nodded. Oh, yes, the whole night. Frank Braun breakfasted very slowly. He hoped that Teresa would come back into the room, but she did not come. Later he met her in the garden. She went away as he approached her. He tried several times on this day and on the following days to speak with her. She avoided him, almost hid herself from him. Once he tried at night to enter her room, but he found the door locked. Let her be, he thought. He still desired her, but only superficially, half-consciously, and at moments, usually, he forgot her. His thoughts were on his work. Until late into the night he sat over his book, arranged his tracts and tables, gathered the notes and excerpts that he had made during the years. He measured and weighed, made a plan and rejected it, formed a new image, and he saw his work grow and become plastic and concretely visible. Laughing, he called it his mastodon, now that he held Cuvier's, is it Cuvier or Cuvier's? Cuvier's bone in his hand. Once he went to Mr. Peters' barn. The distant music never disturbed him. He needed but to place his hands over his ears, so he had almost forgotten the American's activity as he had Teresa's love. Once on a walk he passed there, just as they were intoning a song within. He entered, stood far back by the door, and listened. They sang the fasting song. Bid me all thy songs to sing, my compassion's offering bring, Lamb of God from blemish free, that took all my sins from me. Let thy sorrow bear a part deep in every Christian's heart. Let thy dying agony prove a comfort unto me. They sang all 7 stanzas, most of them from memory. Only a few glanced at the hymnal. Frank Braun looked about him in the old barn. It was an immense place with 3 walls of stone. Only the front wall was made of planks. The transformation of the barn into a hall had been effected merely by breaking out the wooden ceiling, which, exactly in the middle, had divided the barn into 2 stories, and by using these boards to hide the rough inner gable of the roof. In addition, a window had been placed in the side wall, which admitted little enough air and light into the room. No real ecclesiastical decorations were to be seen anywhere. Only against the rear wall hung a rather large crucifix. The penitential meeting followed, in a general way, the method of the services of the Salvation Army. They sang and prayed passionately. Thereupon, the American, whose face Frank Braun could scarcely discern in the artificial twilight, preached penitence, fighting mightily against the devil, the father of all sins. Now and then he mixed his speech with some fine phrase in monstrous English, which had obviously clung to his memory from his experience in Pennsylvania. He urged his followers to practice penitence and closed with a warm prayer. Then he asked whether anyone in the assembly desired to express his soul. A sturdy farmhand with a huge red goiter came forward and expressed his soul. He related, stammering, that he had formerly been a frightful drunkard, that he had but one thought, namely wine. He had been drunk at least 4 times a week and twice on Sunday. He fairly reveled in the recollections of that sinful time, exaggerated fearfully, painting himself as black as possible in order to radiate now a whiter innocence. For now the Lord Jesus had illumined him with his grace, so that he now abominated drunkenness as the most horrible of vices, and found his sole happiness in aspirations toward the Lamb and toward the blood of the Savior. I was as black as the devil in hell, he grunted, but now I am clean through the grace of the Redeemer. God has guarded me from every sin for 3 months, and will continue to do so. In other days I was full of wine. Today I am full of the Holy Ghost. The huge fellow turned his eyes to heaven. His voice sounded clucking and hoarse, and the large goiter expanded and swung to and fro. Frank Braun could not suppress a short laugh. For a moment the glances of the assembly turned to him, but immediately thereafter the voices arose again in a fervent prayer to the Son of God. He made the observation that here, as with all fanatical sects, Jesus played the largest and almost the only part. From the minds of even these intensely Catholic hill peasants, the saints seemed to have vanished, and the Holy Virgin herself was scarcely mentioned. All the songs and prayers were taken from the Catholic prayer book of the Diocese of Trent, and except for the brief sermons and public confessions, the American had imported no new element into the old home. Congregational singing and prayer, a brief exhortation, then a confession. These followed each other with dull monotony. Somewhat disappointed and very much bored, Frank Braun left the hall as the assembly raised its voice for the fourth time in the fasting song. He thought that Don Vincenzo was probably right, and that these people would soon have had quite enough of this mischievous nonsense. This American was hardly made of the same stuff as Father Vincenzo of Padua. Frank Braun sat at his work. Days passed and weeks. He saw nothing, heard nothing. Sometimes he glanced through the window at the lake and then had to remind himself to go where he really was. He scarcely observed now that the girl. He talked to her as to any stranger, and only used her like her father or Angelo. Hello, brovs. The farmhand, when he desired some service. The sheets grew into a pile. Thus did he desire to begin. First, to shatter all that is, to destroy the very foundations, and then, on this free field, build the new temple. Assured of victory, he hurled forth his denials. In large letters, he wrote the superscription. What the hell's a superscription? The superscription of a certain chapter, the Latin peoples. In the very first sentence, he cried out that the term was mere sound and fury, a ridiculous soap bubble which burst in air. He took up the various countries, the Pyrenean Peninsula. A certain people had once inhabited it. Iberians, what did the name matter? Roman armies carried their language thither. Roman armies that came from all the ends of the earth and were scarcely for a tenth part of Italic origin. For a tenth part of Italic origin. The conquered assumed the language of the conquerors, that was all, and there was a racial blending of trifling unimportance. Then came the Goths. This time the conquerors assumed the language of the conquered, and again came Moors and Berbers and Jews from the south. Franks from the north. To the west, however, came mixed folks from all the islands and coasts to Lusitania. New blendings again and again. Only the language remained, the language of Rome. It conquered all the conquerors. And why did Latin take the land by storm and hold it firmly against the century-long rule of lords, of strange idioms? Because the land had had no language when the Roman came. No common tongue, only 100 small languages, exactly as the United States became English, as Mexico and the whole of South America submitted to the Spanish influence. 1,000 tribes, and all hostile to one another, 1,000 languages, and all strangers. Frank Braun laid down his pen and laughed. Once, somewhere in the Bolivian Chaco, he had met a powerful ant-eater. The fellow stood in a clearing, erect on a tall white ant-hill. He looked around after him curiously, silent and without fear. Then he dug with his front paws in the loose sand. It was as though he wanted to invite him to partake of this delicious meal. Swarming by the many thousands, the frightened ants ran about. Then the ant-eater protruded his long, pointed, worm-like tongue and rolled it like a sticky snake among the fleeing insects. That is the Spanish tongue, thought Frank Braun. At one gulp it devours 100 Indians. That damned Dago, he had cried, and sent a bullet through the beast's head, for he hated the Spaniards. And thus it was that the language of Rome devoured the 100 languages of the peninsula. Only one survived, the Basque tongue of the northern mountains. And how long would it persist? Rome's language took root, tough, steadfast against all conquerors. To be sure, it split, was shredded, mixed, so that today the Castilian understood no word of what the Catalan said, and the Gallego fell into dull silence when the Andalusian addressed him. Nevertheless, Rome's language conquered. But where was the Latin race? There was a people in its land who absorbed a little drop of Latin blood, even as later it absorbed so much more of Gothic and Moorish and Jewish blood. And all of those admixtures it had long since sweated out again, and the ancient folk remained conquered and conquering, always the same. What nonsense to call it Latin. And France did it not show in all respects in an analogous picture. Gaul, once conquered, accepted the language of Rome, and then imposed the same language upon the conquering Goths, Burgundians, Franks, and Normans. From the conqueror, it derives its language. From the others, its name, and yet remained what it was. There was Romania, the land that has both the name and the language of Rome, and yet its people has but the tiniest drop of Roman blood, less than any of the others, the blood of criminals, which in the 2nd century the Emperor Trajan transferred to the Danube. There remained Italy, the motherland, Greeks in the south, Gauls in the north, between Latium and Rome, then innumerable slaves from all lands and zones, and finally Goths and Vandals, Langobards, Normans, and Saracens, and ever again, during all the centuries, new yellow-haired hordes from across the Alps. Rome's language subdued 100 conquerors. But what had the language to do with the race? Less than nothing. Were the Negroes of Haiti Latin because they spoke French, or the Indians of Mexico and Brazil because they spoke Spanish and Portuguese, or the black drones of the United States Germanic because they chatter English? Language is one thing and race another. They have nothing in common. Thus, all deductions concerning the perception of racial individuality that are based on language must necessarily be false. How good it was, he reflected, that history in the South is a trifle older, scarcely more than 2 or 3 wretched millennia, but old enough to shatter utterly the fable of the Latin peoples. Otherwise, the folly concerning the oneness of the Latin, as of the Slavic and Germanic races, might persist eternally, merely because the oneness of the language was a fact. How easy it was to blow asunder the so-called Latin world, and how difficult the process when applied to the Germanic and Slavic peoples. You, the Canton guy. I don't know what the hell that means. Merely be the so-called how difficult the process when applied to the Germanic and Slavic peoples. Merely because the historical record was lacking. One had here scarcely any points of departure, tiny wedges, merely into the rough blocks of thick-skulled hypotheses. There were the Bulgars, Ergo-Finns, who made their way into the valley of the Danube. There they mixed with the Slavic-speaking people and gave the land the name of the conqueror, while they themselves assumed the language of the conquered. Racial brothers of the Magyars, yet the latter, like the Bulgars, were blended in with the conquered, submerged in their folk ways, but imposed on the conquered land both their name and their language. He lost his way, seeking with difficulty the scattered fragments of races. Thus he took the Kutso-Wallachians by the Pindus range, the Zinzars in Thessaly, assuredly related in race to the Mordwin Finnish of Kazan, and yet Latin in their language, and the Lapps and Kwans of Scandinavia, who spoke Swedish or Finnish, and were yet neither Ugrian nor Germanic. Then the Turkish Cumanians in Hungary, and the strange Permians and Sergianians in Vologda and Archangel. You made a video about Canton Township 8 months ago. I said, yo, the Canton guy, in reference to that. Also, I lived there. I don't remember the Canton video. Sorry, but I don't remember it at all. Then he found his way back. He laid a new lance at rest and tilted against language with a flying banner. It amused him to write a long page, each sentence of which was in another tongue. And am I now a Russian? He laughed, and now a Spaniard, and now a Highland Gaul, and now a Guarani Indian. He took his arrows wherever he could find them. He forged sharp points out of 100 trifles which he had gathered up by the wayside. For instance, he had known a kindly college professor in Saxony. The man gave instruction in German, and with sincere feeling declaimed to his boys the odes of Klopstock. Then, by some chance, he was transferred to a remote little town in East Prussia. His work left him a great deal of leisure, and so, one fine day, he began to study Masurian. No human being today knew a single word of this language, but he asserted that the Masurians ought to know their mother tongue, and that it was, in truth, the finest language in the world. He translated Schiller and Klopstock into Masurian, and Ramler and Eichendorff, and all the patriotic poets. And he really succeeded in founding a tiny political party. He ran for the Diet as the Masurian candidate and received several dozen votes. He discovered somehow a Masurian among the ancestors of Schiller, and of course among his own, as things as he will know neither peace nor rest until all the land from the Elbe to the Dwina is Masurian. Once upon a time he was a German, now he is a Masurian, because he alone in the world can speak the ancient tongue. Language. There was the lion's skin of all asses. Frank Braun thought of Herr Friedrich Wilhelm Bandmann, who was a frame maker and dwelt in his native city next to the home of his parents. A bachelor he was and a mighty patriot. Even more than the college professor, he swore by Bismarck in everything the latter did. Then, when Bismarck was deposed, his blood boiled. He sold his house and his business, got drunk one last time at the Veterans Club, and bidding a tearful farewell to all his comrades, went to America. The steamer landed at Hoboken, and since Herr Bandmann knew no word of English, he remained in this German city and crossed the river to New York, but a single time with a safe companion. He remained there 2 hours and a half, but he liked New York as little as Hoboken. Thus he returned to Germany by the next steamer. He had been away for 3 weeks. Frank Braun met him on the street and said, "Well, Herr Bandmann, so you are back again in Germany." Then Herr Bandmann looked at him with astonishment and a sense of injury in his eyes and asked, "Speak you English?" He had become an American. And Frank Braun wrote, "My parrot speaks just as good German as a preacher. He is undoubtedly of Germanic blood." And that's all, bros. That's all. Guten Abend.